Hello my dear students and welcome once again to Zenith Academy Online. Today we are doing a very important poem for ICSE Class 9 and 10, that is A Considerable Speck by Robert Frost. Now students, this is very important from your board exam point of view. So let's begin. I'll explain each and every word and we'll understand line wise. So let me first read out stanza 1 for you. A speck that would have been beneath my sight, on any but a paper sheet so white, set off across what I had written there, and I had idly poised my pen in air, to stop it with a period of ink, when something strange about it made me think. This was no dust speck by my breathing blown, but unmistakably a living might, with inclinations it could call its own. So let's talk about the first line. A speck that would have been beneath my sight. So first let's read how I will go about. I will read each and every line. We'll understand the important word meanings. I'll explain that line and we'll do analysis of that line as well, so that it becomes very easy for you to answer all the questions that come in board exams. So first line, a speck that would have been beneath my sight. What does speck mean? Speck means a very small mark or piece, or any very small amount is also called speck. So what does it mean? The poet describes a tiny speck that is so small it would normally be unnoticeable. ना? Normally जब देखते तो वो नहीं दिखता था. It would have been beneath my sight. So the word beneath my sight suggests that the poet wouldn't have seen it under normal circumstances, and this foreshadows the idea that small things often go unnoticed unless observed closely. The second line says, on any but a paper sheet so white. It means the poet sees the tiny speck only because it appears against a white sheet of paper. So what does the poet mean to say by it? The contrast between the dark speck and the white paper emphasizes its visibility. Symbolically, the paper could represent a blank slate or stage for careful observation, much like how small details in life are only noticed in certain conditions. So students, if you know the line, the exact literal meaning of it, and what does the poet want to emphasize by saying that, everything is there. Okay, so please make proper notes, okay, or take the screenshots and learn this very well. Okay, so when he says on any but a paper sheet so white, he means to emphasize its visibility. How small details in life are only noticed in certain conditions. Now set off across what I had written there. So the speck starts moving across the paper where the poet had already written something. Read the line carefully. Set off across what I had written there. So the speck starts moving across the paper where the poet had already written something. Analysis. The movement of the speck interrupts the poet's writing, suggesting that nature can disrupt human activities. It also hints at the theme of the unexpected awareness. A small thing can capture attention in a significant way. So poet wants to suggest that nature can disrupt human activities, the way the speck set off across what he had written. And I had idly poised my pen in air. What does idly mean? Idly means doing nothing or without any particular purpose, just. And poised means not moving but ready to move, about to do something. So ready to act or about to do something is poised. So the line says, and I had idly poised my pen in air. हवा में मेरी पेन ऐसे ही मैंने पॉज करके रखी थी. I was not doing anything, but ऐसे पॉज थी कि बस अब लिखूंगा, right? So the poet pauses while writing, holding his pen in the air without moving. So the word idly suggests that thoughtlessness or acting without much concern. This moment is significant because it shows the poet's initial indifference towards the speck, which will soon change. So this is the initial indifference that the poet has towards the speck, which will soon change in the coming lines. to stop it with a period of ink. So if you connect the fourth line, and I had idly poised my pen in air I had poised my pen to stop it with a period of ink. So he wanted to stop the might. So read here, the poet intends to crush the speck with a dot of ink from his pen. Okay, now what do you mean by period of ink? Okay, period, it conveys a sense of decisiveness and that the matter is closed. So whenever someone says something, okay, or makes a statement and says period, it means the person who is saying that or writing that doesn't want any other further discussion. It means the matter has ended there. Correct? That is period in English. So here, if you read the line, to stop it with a period of ink, the poet intends to crush the speck with a dot of ink from his pen. This shows an instinctive human reaction to eliminate something small and insignificant without thinking much about it. However, the use of period of ink cleverly plays on punctuation. A period as in writing and a literal ink drop, reinforcing the connection between the act of writing and the poet's realization. So, the poet wants to stop it with a period of ink. Now, when something strange about it made me think, okay, the poet hesitates. Now, here the poet is hesitating. When something strange about it made me think, the poet hesitates because he notices something unusual about the speck. Okay, when something strange, that is unusual about it, made me think. Now, this is the turning point in the stanza. Now, instead of acting without thought, instead of putting a drop of ink on it, the poet is now curious and begins to reflect. This shift from the instinct to do that to contemplation is a key theme in Frost's poetry. So here there is a shift from instinct to contemplation. Now he is curious about something unusual that he has noticed. This was no dust speck by my breathing blown. So the poet realizes that the speck is not just a piece of dust moved by his breath. So if he's breathing and there's a speck of dust, earlier he now thought, okay, now this is something that is living. This is not just dust speck by my breathing. Okay, so the phrase by my breathing blown suggests that at first he assumed it was insignificant and passive. Okay, however, this realization shows a change in perception. Now earlier he was thinking that this speck is insignificant and passive, but now there is a change in perception as he acknowledges that it might be something more than an inanimate particle. It might be something more than a non-living particle, but unmistakably a living might. But now he is saying, so connect the line, this was no dust speck by my breathing blown, but unmistakably a living might. So the poet recognizes that the speck is actually a living creature, a tiny mite, that is a small insect. So the analysis is, the word unmistakably indicates certainty, for sure. This moment marks the poet's shift in awareness. Now there is a shift in awareness of poet. He now sees the mite as a life form rather than just an object. Now, what ninth is, with inclinations it could call its own. So the poet acknowledges that the mite has its own will, instincts and purpose. Now this is a profound realization. The phrase inclination it could call its own suggests that individuality and autonomy, even in something as tiny as a mite. So now there is a profound realization by the poet. This phrase, inclinations it could call its own, suggests individuality and autonomy even in something as tiny as a mite. The poet now sees the creature as a small but significant being with its own choices, making him reconsider his earlier impulse to destroy it. So now after this realization, Now he is reconsidering his earlier impulse. पहले जो उसको impulse हुआ था, अचानक से जो reaction हुआ था कि मैं उसको ink का drop गिरा दूँ, right? So now he is saying कि इसके खुद के अपने inclinations हो सकते हैं. He sees the creature as a small but significant being with its own choices. Okay. So key takeaways from stanza 1, the main idea of stanza 1 was the poet starts by seeing a tiny speck as insignificant but soon realizes that it is a living mite with its own purpose. Theme, the importance of not dismissing small things in life. This is the theme. The importance of not dismissing the small things in life. How even the tiniest creatures deserve attention and respect. Now let's talk about the literary devices used. There is imagery used in stanza 1. The contrast between the speck and the white paper shows the imagery. Symbolism, the mite represents small but meaningful existences. Irony, what's the irony here? A considerable speck. Okay, so speck is such small thing, but here considerable. So there is an irony. Speck to chota hai, but considerable. So a considerable speck, something tiny, turns out to be quite important. Now personification, the mite is given inclinations. We said he has inclinations of its own. So as if it has a mind of its own. So there is personification. So this stanza sets up the poem's overall message, thoughtfulness and respect for even the smallest of beings. Let's move to paragraph 2 or stanza 2. It paused as with suspicion of my pen and then came racing wildly on again, to where my manuscript was not yet dry, then paused again and either drank or smelt. With loathing for again it turned to fly. Plainly with an intelligence I dealt, it seemed too tiny to have room for feet, yet must have had a set of them complete, to express how much it didn't want to die. So let's read the first line. It paused as with suspicion of my pen. So the mite stops moving as if it is cautious or fearful of the poet's pen. It paused as if it's suspicion, shak of my pen. The mite stops moving as if it is cautious or fearful of the poet's pen. The word suspicion here suggests that the mite has an awareness of danger. This subtly humanizes the mite, making it seem like a thinking creature rather than just an insect. And then came racing wildly on again. So after pausing, the mite suddenly moves quickly across the page again. The phrase racing wildly shows panic or urgency, making the mite appear conscious of its surroundings and all the possible threats that it might face. To where my manuscript was not yet dry. Now students, what is manuscript? A manuscript is a page or number of pages where something is written. Okay, some fonts are written. So whenever there's some written things, that is a manuscript. So the mite, to where my manuscript was not yet dry, the mite moves towards a section of the poet's writing where the ink is still wet. He has just written and the ink is still wet, and the mite moves towards that section of the poet's writing. So this mite symbolizes the meeting of life, that is the mite, and art, that is the manuscript. So the mite's movement also disrupts the poet's writing, reinforcing the theme of unexpected small things having a big impact. Then paused again and either drank or smelt. So the mite stops once more, seemingly either drinking the ink or smelling it. The poet is observing the mite's action closely, suggesting that even this tiny creature is curious and interacting with its environment just as humans do. So it paused again and either drank or smelt. Now with loathing for again it turned to fly. Now with loathing is connected with this line. Then paused again and either drank or smelt. He either drank or smelt the ink. with loathing. Now with disgust, loathing is not like disliking anything very much, right? So with loathing, for again it turned to fly. The mite reacts with disgust, that is loathing, and moves away quickly. So turn to fly means moved away very quickly. So this suggests that the mite consciously rejects the ink as if it finds it unpleasant. Again, this reinforces the idea that even tiny creatures have preferences, instincts and reactions. Plainly with an intelligence I dealt. So the poet realizes that the mite is not just a mindless creature, it shows some level of intelligence as well. So this is a significant moment in the poem, as the poet now fully acknowledges the mite as a sentient being. Okay, now the poet is acknowledging him. Now the poet realizes the mite is not just a small creature, a mindless creature, but he has intelligence in it. So he acknowledges the mite as a sentient being. It challenges the assumption that only larger creatures or humans have intelligence, right? This is what we all think, that only we have intelligence. We neglect smaller creatures, but here the poet wants to emphasize on the fact that even the insignificant creatures can have intelligence and their own mind. It seemed too tiny to have room for feet. Okay, the mite seemed so tiny that the mite is so small that it's hard to imagine that it's hard to imagine it even having visible legs or feet. There's no room, no place for feet. No room for feet means it is difficult to imagine that it has feet. So the mite is so small that it's hard to imagine it even having visible legs or feet. So this line emphasizes the minuscule size of the mite, the very small size of the mite, making its quick movements and intelligence even more surprising. Yet must have had a set of them complete. So despite its tiny size, despite of we thinking that there is no room for the feet, despite its tiny size, the mite must have feet because it moves with purpose. The poet acknowledges that the mite, though small, is fully formed and functional, just like any other living creature. And this line highlights the complexity of even the smallest life forms. Even if it is so tiny, even if we think there's no room where there will be legs or something, right? So this highlights that even smallest life forms have all the complexities. They have all the structures in them, all the organs, all the structures that are necessary for life, for thinking. To express, okay, we'll read the 8th line again. Yet it must have had a set of them complete to express how much it didn't want to die. Okay, the mite's action, which action? Running, pausing and reacting shows its desire to survive. It didn't want to die. So there was a desire in it, in the mite, to survive. So this is a profound moment in the stanza. The poet realizes that like all living beings, the mite values its own life. This line conveys a universal truth that no matter how small, all creatures have an instinct for survival. No matter how small it is, all the living creatures have this instinct for survival. So let's talk about key takeaways from this stanza. The poet closely observes the mite's movement and realizes that it is a living, thinking creature with a will to survive. Okay, that's the main idea. Now, theme for all life. Theme is respect for all life. This is the theme of this stanza. No matter how small. Respect for all life, no matter how small. The poem suggests that intelligence and survival instincts exist even in the tiny creatures. Let's talk about the literary devices that are used here. Personification. The mite suspects, loathes and expresses. These are the 3 words used, giving it a human-like quality. Imagery. Okay, what's the imagery used? The detailed description of the mite's movements makes the reader visualize its struggle. Irony. The poet initially sees the mite as insignificant, but by the end he respects its intelligence and will to live. So this stanza reinforces the poem's central idea. Small things can have great significance if we observe them with care and thoughtfulness. Let's move on to our next paragraph or next stanza. So stanza 3. It ran with terror and with cunning crept. It faltered, I could see it hesitate. Then in the middle of the open sheet, cowered down in desperation to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. I have none of the tender than thou, collectivistics regimenting love with which the modern world is being swept. So it ran with terror and with cunning crept. So the mite runs in fear, in terror, and then moves cautiously, moves very carefully, cautiously. So the crept, he kept on crept, he walked as if he was creeping, okay, and it was cunning, it means very cautiously it was doing it. The use of terror and cunning suggests that the mite is both afraid and intelligent enough, because cunning, who are cunning? People who are intelligent, who can think cleverly, okay. So both afraid and intelligent enough to act carefully in response to danger. The contrast between running in panic and creeping carefully highlights its survival instinct. It faltered, I could see it hesitate. Faltered, what is the meaning of faltered, students? To become very weak, to move in a way that it is not steady. Dagmagate na, dagmagana is called faltered. To become weak or move in a way that is not steady. Moving in a non-steady way. Then hesitate, you all know hesitate means to pause before you do something or before you take a decision. So usually because you are uncertain or worried about something, that is why you pause before you do something, right? So it faltered, I could see it hesitate. The mite stops for a moment, no? He faltered, डगमगाता है अपनी जगह से, he stops for a moment and he is not steady when he walks. So he is not steady and he stops, okay. Unsure of where to go next because he could see it hesitate. So faltered and hesitate suggest uncertainty and fear, showing that the mite is actively thinking about its next move. This further supports the idea that even a tiny creature has its own will and decision-making abilities. The third line, then in the middle of the open sheet, the mite moves to the center of the open page where he was writing. So this positioning is very symbolic. Students, very important question from board exams. This positioning is symbolic, standing alone and exposed in an open space. So as human, when you are in a situation, when you are standing exposed and open in a place, how do you feel? Just imagine, okay? It mirrors human vulnerability. मतलब चारों तरफ से कोई भी आपको अटैक कर सकता है, बहुत सारी चीज़ें हो सकती है आपके साथ. You are all alone standing in mid of an open space. So you are vulnerable, right, at that time. So it mirrors human vulnerability in an unpredictable world. So the mite is very vulnerable in an unpredictable world when it is open sheet. He is saying in the middle of the open sheet. Very important line, students. Please write this down. Please practice this. Cower down in desperation to accept. So the mite is, sorry, I am saying he again and again, the mite is in middle of the open sheet in mid of an unpredictable world. Cower down in desperation to accept. Now he is cowering down. What does cower down means? Cower down means to shrink away or crouch down, okay, in fear. And often this is while moving backwards. So that is cowering down. Desperation, you all know. Now, the mite lowers itself in fear, seemingly resigned to its fate. Now, he is accepting the fate, maybe, okay. So, the mite is lowering down in fear, seemingly resigned to its fate. So, the words cower and desperation emphasize submission, now he is submitting, and helplessness. The mite appears to surrender to whatever the poet decides to do with it, reinforcing the theme of power and control in life. That's the theme. Okay, so it is a small creature. So it is cowering down in fear and ready to accept the fate that the larger creature has for him. Whatever I accorded it of fate. So the poet is saying, cover down, the mite is cover down in desperation to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. Okay, so the poet realizes that the mite's fate is in his hands. The line, so accord is to give something to somebody. So now the poet realizes that he has this accord to give something to somebody. He has this power of controlling the fate of mite. Okay, the poet realizes that the mite's fate is in his hands. So this line deepens the idea that the poet holds absolute power over mite's life, just as humans often control the fate of smaller and weaker beings. It raises ethical questions about power and mercy. I have none of the tender than thou. Okay, so tenderer than thou, when is this phrase used? It means someone who believes they are more sensitive, okay, compassionate or caring than others, often in a self-righteous or condescending manner. So tenderer than thou means someone who believes that they are more tender, they are more sensitive or compassionate than others. So here the poet is saying, I have none of the tenderer than thou. Okay, the poet claims that he is not overly sentimental or excessively kind. So tenderer than thou mocks self-righteousness, compassion, suggesting that the poet is practical rather than overly emotional in his view of the mite. Collectivistic regimenting love. This is very important again. The poet criticizes the forced collective thinking and the structured or mechanical love. Now students, this is a philosophical statement. Frost is rejecting blind conformity and artificial compassion imposed by the society. He implies that true understanding and mercy should be personal and not dictated by societal norms. Students, you all know, nowadays what happens is the society has this forced collective thinking. They force our thinking, okay, that we should be doing this or that if you are a part of the society and you don't think yourself. So this compassion that the society is forcing on you is an artificial compassion. Okay, collectivistic regimenting love, the love that you want to show. For example, in Valentine's Day, if you are not giving rose to your partner or not showing your love to them, it means you are not fit for the society. The society has set these norms that you have to do this. So even if the person loves that person so well, the other person very much, but still if he is not giving rose to him or her, it means you are against this. So the society is collectively forcing you to do something. Okay, this is collectivistic regimenting love. The poet criticizes forced collective thinking and structured mechanical love. I hope you understood now. So with which the modern world is being swept. The modern world is being swept with what? With collectivistic regimenting love. Okay, according to poet, the true understanding and mercy should be personal and not dictated by societal norms, with which the modern world is being swept. Now with this, the modern world is being swept with this. The poet observes that modern society is being overtaken by this forced collectivistic way of thinking. So this is a social critic. Frost suggests that people today blindly follow ideologies and trends rather than thinking for themselves. He contrasts genuine individual compassion with society's artificial structured love. So key takeaways from this stanza are: the mite struggle represents the struggle of all living beings against fate. The poet reflects on his power over mite's life, okay, linking it to broader themes of control, mercy, and societal influence. So let's talk about theme of this stanza. Power and fate is one of the very important theme here. The poet controls the might's destiny, just as powerful individuals control weaker ones. Next theme is individual versus society. The poet rejects forced collective compassion and emphasizing independent thought and genuine emotion. Third theme is survival instinct. The might's fear, hesitation, and movement show that even small creatures fight to survive. Let's talk about the literary devices in this stanza. Personification. In the whole poem, personification is there. The might is given human-like emotions like terror, hesitation, desperation. Imagery, vivid description, making the scene clear and intense. Irony. Though small and insignificant, the might struggle raises deep philosophical questions about life and power. So this stanza shifts the poem from a simple observation to a critic of modern society, making it more than just a reflection on a tiny creature. It becomes a larger statement on human nature and morality. So students, please remember literary devices in the whole poem. These devices are there. Personification, imagery, and irony are there. Let's move on to fourth stanza. But this poor microscopic item now, since it was nothing I knew evil of, I let it lie there till I hope it slept. I have a mind myself and recognize mind when I meet with it in any guise. No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. Amazing stanza, right? Let's see the first line. But this poor microscopic item now. So the poet refers to the tiny mite with pity, acknowledging its insignificance. Okay, so there's a pity because he's saying poor microscopic item, showing the insignificance. The word poor conveys sympathy, and microscopic item reminds us of its tiny, almost invisible existence. This line reinforces the theme of perception, that how something so small can still be meaningful. Since it was nothing I knew evil of, the poet realizes that the mite has done no harm and is innocent. It's not evil. This line highlights moral reflection. The poet acknowledges that he has no reason to harm the mite. It suggests a deeper ethical consideration of life, no matter how small. So when the poet says it, since it was nothing I knew evil of, because many a times what happens, students, is in the world that we live, okay, the larger creators, the larger creatures or the powerful creatures. If we talk in human, if we are powerful, if we are rich or having some position, we are powerful. Okay, we think that the poor are always evil, na chor honge or thief honge. We always think. So here it is saying, since it was nothing I knew evil of. Okay, so there has to be an ethical consideration of life, no matter how small that life is. We should ethically consider it. I let it lie there till I hope it slept. So instead of harming the mite, the poet allows it to rest in peace. He lets the mite lie there. Still, the poet hopes that it slept. The phrase "till I hope it slept" suggests kindness and restraint. So rather than destroying a tiny creature just because he could drop a ink on it and just because he could, so rather than doing that, he chooses to let it be. This moment represents mercy and respect for even the smallest of lives. I have a mind myself and recognize. So the poet is saying that as a thinking being, he can identify intelligence in others. I have a mind myself, I am a thinking being, and I can recognize I can identify the intelligence in others. So here Frost makes a connection between himself and the mite. Despite its smallness, it showed intelligence, and the poet, being intelligent himself, acknowledges it. This line reflects the idea that life, no matter how tiny, has thought and purpose. So I am connecting the fourth with the fifth line. I have a mind myself and recognize mind, and I recognize mind when I meet with it in any guise. In any guise, matlab even if it is in disguise, even if it is any form, even if it is in any shape or any form, I can recognize brains, I can recognize intelligence, because I myself is intelligent. So the poet recognizes consciousness, intelligence or awareness in any form, any guise, and even if it is in disguise. So any guise means any shape or being, even a minuscule one, okay, even a minuscule mite, even if it is a very, very small mite, it means any, okay. This is a profound statement about respecting intelligence and life, no matter how different it may seem. No one can know how glad I am to find. The poet expresses joy in recognizing intelligence wherever it appears. So this suggests a deep appreciation for thought, awareness and individuality. It hints at the rarity of true intelligence and independent thinking in the world. So last line, no. On any sheet, the least display of mind. The poet values even the smallest sign of intelligence, whether in a mite or in writing. Okay. On any sheet, the least display of mind. The word sheet cleverly has a double meaning. It could mean the paper where he was writing, where he saw the mite move with a purpose. It could also refer to intellectual writing, okay, suggesting that he values any sign of thought, reason or intelligence in literature as well as in life. So on any sheet, in life or on any sheet that he is writing, on any sheet, the least display of mind, छोटे से छोटा भी इंटेलिजेंस हो तो वो उसको देखकर बहुत खुश हो जाता है, वो उसको पहचान कर बहुत खुश हो जाता है. ओके, सो नो वन कैन नो हाउ ग्लैड आई एम टू फाइंड, मैं कितना खुश हूँ वो फाइंड करके. क्या? ऑन एनी शीट द लीस्ट डिस्प्ले ऑफ माइंड, कहीं पे भी हो लीस्ट डिस्प्ले ऑफ माइंड फाइंड करके मैं बहुत खुश हो जाता हूँ. सो द वर्ड शीट, ओके सॉरी, this final line ties together the entire poem's theme, showing how something as tiny as a mite can still demonstrate the qualities of life and thought that the poet deeply respects. So let's talk about the key takeaways from the last paragraph. The poet ultimately chooses mercy over destruction and values intelligence in all forms. Theme, pehla theme, respect for life. The poet does not harm the mite, showing compassion for even the smallest beings. Second, intelligence and awareness. The poet acknowledges that intelligence exists in many forms, not just in humans. Then, philosophical reflections. The poet ends with a deep appreciation for life, thought and individuality, no matter how small or insignificant something seems. So these are again the same literally devices. Personification. The mite is given intelligence and emotions, making it relatable. Irony. The poet, a great thinker, finds wisdom in a tiny, insignificant creature. Now there is symbolism also here. The mite represents all small, unnoticed forms of life that still matter. So this stanza brings the poem to a thoughtful and philosophical conclusion, emphasizing that life and intelligence deserves recognition regardless of size or status. So that was all about this poem. I hope you liked the explanation. Do write in the comment box please how you liked the video, and do watch out our all the videos for English literature for ICSE Class 10 students. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and do not forget to tap on the bell icon so that you receive all the notification on all the amazing videos to make your board exams better. Thank you and all the best for exams.